every second for 20 billion years. There wouldn't be the remotest probability you'd end up with that structure there. Now, let me take something more simple. If I'd ask 17 people to line up here in front of the auditorium in a certain order and then reshuffle in a different order and then keep doing that over and over again, lining up, time and time again, but never lining up twice in the same order. How many times could 17 people line up? You wouldn't believe it. More than 355 trillion different times. 355 million different ways. Well, you don't believe it. All right, you get 16 of your friends together after the meeting and you try. Well, this universe will be gone before you ever finish trying. Believe me, that's only 17. We have 124 here. And what if it did happen? What would you have? One single molecule of one single protein. But you've got to have billions of tons each of hundreds of different kinds of protein molecules. You've got to have billions of tons each of hundreds of DNA and RNA molecules, and many more. And ladies and gentlemen, that wouldn't produce a living cell anyhow. Remember the second law of thermodynamics? Would these molecules spontaneously organize themselves into more complex systems? Why, of course not. If you have a complex system, they will deteriorate and break down and decay, you see. But we've got to have a very complex system. We've got to have a membrane, very complex. We've got to have energy factors, protein factors. We've got to have the genetic material, and it must be put together in just a particular fashion. Life is not a bag of chemicals. Those elements are arranged in precise fashion. Would that ever happen on this earth through the ordinary processes of chemistry and physics? Absolutely not. Anybody who believes that has tremendous religious faith. That's all I can say. And it is irrational faith, and it's a pseudo-scientific faith. Here's a newspaper article that appeared in the Daily Express of London, August 14, 1981. Two skeptical scientists put their heads together and reached an amazing conclusion. There must be a God. Who were these two scientists? Sir Fred Hoyle, the British astronomer, one of the world's leading astronomers, and his friend and colleague, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe, professor and chairman of the Department of Applied Mathematics and Astronomy, University College in Cardiff, Wales, also a very well-known astronomer. These two scientists became interested in the problem of origin of life a few years ago. They were both atheists at that time, so they had absolutely no inclination to lean toward the creationist point of view. But they calculated the probability of life evolving on this planet in 5 billion years. The probability, 1 chance out of 10 to the 40,000th power. That's 1 out of the number 1 followed by 40,000 zeros. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that's just flatly 0. But they said, after all, there's 100 billion galaxies in the universe. Each galaxy has 100 billion stars. Let us assume that every star in the universe has a planet like the Earth. Let us assume the universe is 20 billion years old. Now let us calculate the probability of life evolving somewhere in the universe in that 20 billion years. The answer? Forget about it. The probability was so low, it was essentially nil, or 0. Sir Fred Hoyle said the probability of evolution is equal to the probability that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard would assemble a Boeing 747. Now I tell people, if you want to believe that, that's okay, but let's just don't call it science. You see, there's a tremendous religious faith, and it's a religious faith that is irrational and certainly pseudoscientific. These scientists did not become creation. By the way, they're not Christians. They don't believe in the Bible or anything like that. But they do believe that wherever life exists in this universe, it had to be created. Did they become creationists because of their religion? Obviously not. They became creationists in spite of their religion, because they were both atheists when they began these studies. Professor Wickramasinghe said he didn't feel very comfortable with this notion, but he could find no logical way out of it. Now, these scientists were open-minded. They were willing to accept the decision dictated by the scientific data, and they agreed with what we had been saying all along. Now, let's take a look at the record of the past, the fossil record. Now, if evolution is true, of course, we should have thousands, tens of thousands of undoubted transitional forms in our museum. There should be no quarrel about it. There should be no dispute. I wouldn't be here tonight we would have the absolute proof of evolution into tens of thousands of undoubted intermediate forms or partway forms. We have 250,000 fossil species in our museum, represented by tens of millions of fossils. No one can plead the poverty of the fossil record. We have an immeasurably rich fossil record. If evolution is true, tens of thousands of those creatures should be of intermediate form. On the other hand, if creation is true, we would expect and predict that fossils of each basic type of plant and animal, which we could call a created kind or basic morphological design, they would appear fully formed right at the start. An onion would be an onion, a rose would be a rose, tigers would be tigers, fish would be fish, people would be people, if creation is true. How we see the predictions are very different. Well, let's take a look at that fossil record. May I first of all cite the British geologist, Dr. Mark Ridley, a most decided evolutionist, in New Scientist, volume 90, 25th of June, 1981, on page 830. There's an article by Mark Ridley. Now, he wants to downgrade the fossil record. He wants to downplay the fossil record because he knows it's in terrible shape as far as evolution is concerned. As a matter of fact, this is what he says. No real evolutionist, whether gradualist or punctuationist, uses the fossil record as evidence in favor of the theory of evolution as opposed to special creation. End of quote. So he says, no real evolutionists even try to use the fossil record to defend evolution. Now, I don't know whether Dr. Plimer is going to do that tonight, but I've heard many evolutionists try to do that. Well, according to Dr. Ridley, they're not a real evolutionist if they do such a thing, you see. Why does he say that? What better proof of evolution could you have than the fossil record if evolution is true? Now, others have attacked the fossil record. Dr. Colin Patterson, senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History, he's an evolutionist, not a creationist, but he's made some rather astounding statements in the last few years. This was taken from an interview on BBC Radio, published in The Listener, 8th of October, 1981, on page 390. That's the publication of the British Broadcasting Corporation. Now, in this article, he is quoted as saying that all we have of these evolutionary phylogenetic trees are the tips of the branches. All the rest is just storytelling of one kind or another. And I imagine we're going to hear some storytelling tonight. But Dr. Patterson said it is nothing but storytelling. We just have the tips of the branches. We have the terminal forms. He also says this, that the history of life is still fiction rather than fact, and the Darwinian penchant for explaining evolution in terms of adaptation and selection is largely empty rhetoric. End of quote. Then he goes on to say, just as pre-Darwinian biology was carried out by people whose faith was in the Creator and His plan, post-Darwinian biology is being carried out by people whose faith is in almost the deity of Darwin. Now that's by an evolutionist. That's by a paleontologist sitting among millions and millions of fossils. And he stated in a letter that he had not included any examples of transition forms in his book on evolution because he said he didn't know of any, either among the fossils or among the living. Well, let's take a look at some major aspects of the fossil record. Now here we see a reconstruction of animals whose fossils have been found in Cambrian rocks. It is believed by evolutionary geologists that these rocks began to form 600 million years ago and formed during a period of 80 million years. I don't have the foggiest notion how you get fossils under those conditions. You have to have a catastrophic sudden burial to get fossils. Here we have billions times billions of fossils of these creatures. Seems to me to speak certainly of catastrophe on a mammoth scale. But however they formed, we have a great variety of complex invertebrates in these Cambrian rocks. We have jellyfish, we have sponges, we have sea urchins, we have the swimming crustacean Cyneal trilobites, we have the sea lily, we have clams, snails, brachiopods, worms, and a tremendous variety of very highly complex invertebrates. Evolutionists say these creatures came from a little microscopic single-cell organism, something like a bacterium or algae or amoeba or something like that, during hundreds of millions of years of time. Now, there's been many reports of the discovery of little microscopic bacteria and algae in the fossil record. Now, if you can find fossils with little microscopic, soft-bodied, single-cell organisms, you certainly can find fossils of everything in between. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not have a single ancestor for one of these creatures, not for one of them. There are no ancestors for trilobites. The first trilobite was a trilobite complete. There are no ancestors for sponges, there's no ancestors for jellyfish, there's no ancestors for a single one of those creatures, not one. We have a tremendous explosion of these creatures. I'm aware of the Ediacaran fauna found here in Australia and other places around the world. They were very complex creatures, soft-bodied, complex creatures. And they could not possibly be the ancestors of the Cambrian animal because they are very, very different. According to Seilacher, a German paleontologist, Stephen J. Gould, and others, they could absolutely not be ancestors of the Cambrian animal. Ladies and gentlemen, as far as I'm concerned, that settles the question. Evolution has not occurred. As far